Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri, and our next guests are the director and stars of the new film, The Current War, the director's cut. In it, Benedict Cumberbatch plays Thomas Edison, racing against Michael Shannon's George Westinghouse to provide electricity for the country. Tuppence Middleton also stars as Mary Edison. In many ways, Thomas is muse, and Alfonso Gomez-Rejon directs the film with a similar visual energy and style that we've seen in his work, from Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl to The Town That Dreaded Sundown and American Horror Story. Let's take a look at The Current War.
Thomas Alva Edison.
My boys and I caught in a jar what before now has only flashed across the night sky.
The future is here. Hello, I'm George Westinghouse.
Nikola Tesla.
I will be the greatest provider of electrical power in the world. Better than Edison.
There's a contest between you.
This is a battle for the brightest minds of America. Today, the impossible becomes possible. And the man that controls that current controls the future. I hope you brought your checkbooks.
If you want to be remembered, it's simple. Shoot a president. But if you prefer to have what I call a legacy, you leave the world a better place than you found it.
You are building miracles out of thin air.
I'm working on something so new that the world would never be the same.
If Mr. Edison succeeds, he will set us back so far we may never recover.
Sometimes we have to work outside of the rules to get what's right.
That is how you truly win.
Well, you got vultures in every venture, but did I mention that his system's lethal? His current kills people.
He's playing dirty. You can, too. You can't see the real force that moves things, and it's not AC/DC, it's not currents, it's currency.
This is costing us a fortune. Westinghouse stole from me!
My motor. That is our future.
Get it!
You're fired. There's never gonna be anything named Tesla ever again.
Our future's not going to be paved with bricks, but with copper.
I have the better system. Westinghouse Electric shall endure.
A city of light. I built it already in my imagination, and it is perfect.
There is a possibility you'll be putting in jeopardy the lives of 28 million people.
Tonight, things could change.
Should we go for a ride?
3, 2, 1. Only one man will rise.
So what's your trade?
Inventor. Fix problems for idiots.
Everybody, please welcome Michael Shannon, Tuppence Middleton, Benedict Cumberbatch, and director Alfonso Gomez-Rejon. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. Congrats on the film. Truly, congrats on the film. It's been a long journey, correct?
Correct.
I mean, it's called the director's cut, and I think for some people that there's questions about that because the movie's just coming out. So why is it a director's cut coming out? So go for it, sir.
Briefly, there was an earlier incarnation of the movie that screened, and a couple of years ago, that was a rough cut. It was a work in progress, somewhat compromised, and it needed some time we needed a little time and distance from that version of the movie to come out and introduce a version that is the version that I intended to make to begin with.
Did that time that you had feel, was that a good period of time, or was that a bit of a hell where you weren't sure what was happening with your movie and you were just working on it to see where you could get it in case one day it did get released?
It was caught up in a much larger story, and there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of pain that goes with that as an artist, not knowing if your work is going to be seen, or that it's a version of the film that you never intended to make. That can be very, very painful, but I never stopped believing in it, and it was a movie worth fighting for, as I'm here representing the beautiful cast that came along the journey with me. And there was a responsibility that comes with that. And so I never stopped cutting it in my head and jotting notes down. And on my desk, I had the scenes I intended to shoot, storyboards for them. And when I did get that call, I'd be ready. And then eventually, a year later, I got the call, and And then all of a sudden, we found each other in a farmhouse outside of London to shoot 5 scenes in a day. Like
5 scenes in a day?
It was like an independent film. You walk into one room and it was Nick Holt as Tesla. Walk in another room and it's Benedict and Edison, and Benedict and Mary and Tuppence, and it was great fun. And it means a lot to me that everyone came together and to finish strong.
One more question about the process, just because I think it's an amazing story, and the journey of an artist coming to his final, what he wanted to make is beautiful in a way. Was there a moment in that year, did you feel like you would never get the chance to get back to the film, or did you always have hope or think that something was going to happen to bring you back to the film and make the version that you always intended?
Even at my lowest, and I went through all the emotions every day, but even at my lowest, I knew the film hadn't been released yet. Right. So I knew there's that saying that there's that saying that you're never done with the movie; it's just ripped away from you, and no one had taken it away quite yet. So there was a little bit of hope that at some point I would have that opportunity to get in there.
Yeah. Benedict, you play Thomas Edison. What attracted you to playing Edison and also working with Alfonso, who I will say, not just because you're on the stage, has a very distinct visual style that I think you can pick up from both his movies and his TV work.
Thank you. That's part of my answer.
Stole it from you.
You did. You're doing all the work already. I was a huge fan of his from Miel and The Dying Girl. It was such a homage to the greatness of cinema. It's done with such love and delicacy, and sort of defied any genre categorization, and was heartbreaking and funny and beautiful all in one. And I thought somebody like that, with that kind of vision, that auteur vision of particular texture and, I don't know, just experimentation and daring, could really bring off a film that would be then about modernity. Even though it was looking back in time, it was looking at people who were creating a future we now live in and take for granted, frankly, sometimes. But in those moments, to create light out of dark, to turn the Promethean switch on and change our lives forever, and what it was amongst the politics as well, but visually what that would do with a film, how to tell that story and keep it alive and interesting, and blow away the cobwebs of sort of period drama tropes. He's your man. And just so amenable, such a beautiful human being. I mean, he's being modest as ever, but we're all here to support this man and his version of the film, which is the version we all signed up to do. And it was ripped from his hands at an early age. I mean, he's being polite about it. It was not his film that was shown. It was someone else's. So that's why we're here first and foremost. And before, I was attracted to the role because, it's a big challenge. And I was at a different part of my career when it first came on my desk as a potential or a script that people were interested in me looking at, and I thought, Christ, that's a challenge, a big American icon, and it's not exactly a takedown, but it's a pretty warts and all examination of a man in a period of his life where he's pretty hedged in and fearful and protective and resorts
in many ways,
to...
he's a con. I mean, not a con artist per se, but he has to con.
He's
in order
a demagogue
to
in the modern sense. He uses fear as a tool to drive popular opinion against his rival, and not all of it's untrue, unlike a lot of demagoguery of late in our political sphere in particular. But I think he manages to operate some pretty dirty tricks to convince people that Westinghouse AC current is lethal, and therefore his is the only option. And he's up against it because pragmatically, financially, it's a loser. But it is strong enough to charge things at a source point for industrial machinery. It is the thing that will light light bulbs if there's a near enough power plant, but it has to travel down copper wire, which is incredibly expensive. It needs a generator every other square mile to travel the electricity far enough. And I'll let Michael speak about Westinghouse's ideas, but to look at a man that we all know and revere, and the sort of, I guess, the image that he self-created, this sort of Steve Jobs of his time, where he was the product, he was self-promoting, he was the front man and spokesperson for his incandescent bulb, for the phonograph, for every invention that he dallied with, toyed with, got a record number of patents for, hence the moniker or the title, greatest inventor of all time in America. He built that myth around himself. He didn't just want the work to be it. He wanted to charge the work, and he did great things, though. He was a very positive influence as well. He was the first to come up with the idea of research and development with Menlo Park, and his inventions continue to affect our lives in good and discuss further bad ways, I don't know. But he advanced the scientific revolution somewhat, and And yet, in this period of his life, he was hemmed in. He was profoundly deaf as well, which I found a real hook of motivation for understanding why a man who can't hear chooses not to hear. It's both psychological as well as physiological. So, yeah, complex dude, and wanting to sort of dig around in that dirt and get some truth out of it, I guess.
Was there a part of you coming off of Imitation Game, which, for all intents and purposes, is, while the subtext of that movie and the character itself is a somewhat of a subverting the trope of a period piece, it is very much a tried and true period piece in a lot of ways, that working with Alfonso and playing a character like this would feel like a complete subversion of what we expect a period piece to look and feel like?
I think stories work well no matter what era they're told in, if they have a vitality to them and if they deliver both the intrigue and truth through the human, through the character. And I think both of those do that in different ways. I didn't think, oh, well, I've done a period drama one way, so I want to do it an Alfonso way. I just knew that for this story, he had the right engine and skill set and artistic flair, really, to bring off something really bold and original that's not style over content, that holds a content and carries it through with pace and imagination to its conclusions.
Michael, do you want to talk about playing George Westinghouse and being a sort of somewhat of a voice for reason in this, but at the same time someone who is just as much a businessman who is trying to turn a profit in a way?
Yeah, well, I just think Westinghouse is fascinating because nobody really knows anything about him. I mean, his name's everywhere, but I didn't know anything about him at all, and it's kind of the way he wanted it, you know. He was a very private man, kind of perhaps the opposite in terms of, you know, trying to aggrandize himself or immortalize himself. He didn't seem interested in that, which is kind of mysterious. It's a hard thing not to be susceptible to, I think. Most people would like to be remembered as being, you know, special or something, and he just didn't seem to care.
But that said, you don't play him as egoless. He has an ego, and his name is the name of the company.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The name of the company is Wabco.
Oh, right.
And the thing is like, you see Westinghouse everywhere on all these appliances and everything, but the first thing he invented was apparently the air brake. And he invented it to save the lives of the people that were, you know, starting this great rail system in our country. There were hundreds of thousands of people being injured, killed, and he's like, well, this could be better. I think his point of view was always like, how can I make this better? How can I make it more helpful, safer? You know, how can I improve things? But he was fascinated by Edison and fascinated, I think, by science and technology in general. But yeah, you know, look, he didn't live in a hovel by the side of the road. You know, he enjoyed the fruits of his labors. But yeah, but just like I said, I find the most intriguing reason to take any job is that I might learn something about something I didn't know anything about. And I don't think most people have any idea about this story.
Yeah.
They don't have any idea why there's electricity in their building or how that started. And I think it's a good thing to know, particularly now that we're so far down the road and technology is getting so crazy. And it's nice to go back to kind of the advent of the whole scenario.
Tuppence, you play Edison's wife. What was it like working on that relationship with Benedict? In many ways, she's his closest ally and the only person that he truly trusts.
Yeah, I mean, it was great for me, and I can't speak for Catherine, but for us as the women in the film, obviously it's a film about three iconic men, very brilliant minds. But what was really great about Alfonso's versions as it was changing and evolving was that he really wanted to bring the women to the fore and to show how they supported these men in very different ways. I think Marguerite was much more involved with the business side, whereas Mary was a more traditional mother, staying at home with the children. But they did meet when she was working for Edison when she was 16. So I suppose that was quite modern for the time. And yeah, I think we just wanted to show that Edison was a difficult man and he was a workaholic and maybe didn't spend as much time with her and the children as he should have done. But that she was, it takes a strong woman to stand by a man like that, to support him and to love him regardless. And yeah, we didn't want her to be a kind of passive part of the story. And I think that the really lovely thing about this cut is that you see her influence throughout the film and how it drives Edison forward when it gets really tough towards the end.
Well, and you see the weight of her. I mean, it's not a spoiler to talk about what happens in the movie, is it? It's historical, right? Can I say? Okay, cool. You see the weight of her passing on him, of her sickness on him, and how, in some ways, it doesn't destroy his ego; it elevates it even more. He has even less to care about in regards to other people.
Then it's him against nature. You know, he's like he's going to defeat death. He's going to build her everything she needs in order to survive. It's kind of heartbreaking. This man's futile rage against the inevitable at that point, and it's. You know, I think it's also a point that he couldn't have done what he did without her, and yet it was the kind of relationship that wasn't Lady Macbeth or any kind of positive, if that's a negative one, the positive kind of drive. It was there always at the back. I think he loved his family, but he did not attend to them. There was a notorious story about him on his wedding night as well, sleeping in the laboratory at one point. The guy was pretty crazily driven by his work,
by other people,
but not interested in money. His drives are very peculiar, very interesting. Again, it's part of the complexity of him. He wasn't. Yeah, there's ego, but a defensive one built on fear. I think of being assailed from all sides and. I guess that's part of the moral of the story, if there is one, that you're better off doing things together. One of the tragedies, as well as Mary's loss, is the lost opportunity of him to have worked with Westinghouse, with Tesla. What could have been? I mean, and if history could teach us anything in that regard from our story, imagine the combined forces. Imagine that the fences came down between tech giants in Silicon Valley, and they worked towards a common goal, whether it was social parity or whether it was, some kind of understanding or advancement of environmental science in order to sort of bring about some, or just ending corruption in elections, or, the countless problems that great technological advances necessarily bring with them that aren't being addressed,
Instead of giving $1 billion to their ousted CEO or something.
You know what I mean? It's like, how much really do you need? That's part of the tragedy, his loss of her and his loss of what could have been with her, but also with the professional relationship he could have had with the other two that he rivals.
Alfonso, you have a very distinct visual style, I think, across all of your work, but I think specifically in this, there isn't a scene that doesn't love a wide-angle lens, and I was wondering why you approached the movie like that, why that was the specific style that you were thinking of that articulated what you were trying to say with the film.
Well, there was always another character, which is Mother Nature, and there's this dominance of nature that's a theme throughout the film that was always present, because eventually Mother Nature will win the War of the Currents, and I love, just going back a little bit, the way that Edison continues to try to defy nature, and trapping it in a light in a jar and sound in a box, and then trying to keep his wife alive in a motion picture, in a memory. And so that was always something that I felt really strongly about. So we were always secretly always having nature a character. You'll hear in the background a thunderclap, rain. Framing the wide-angle lenses allow us to have some, background light to seep in, or see more stars overhead. It was always
really accentuate Matthew McFadden's broken blood vessel nose.
It's an aesthetic choice. It was something that I felt was, I love the way it feels. I love the way it drops off in darkness, and you don't see the vignetting that you would in daylight. And I just love the way it interacted with the cast. The movie was also embracing the medium that was being invented concurrently with electricity, which is motion pictures. So it was nice to see the seams in the filmmaking sometimes, because it was always going to be another character. But it was a combination of that and the love of motion pictures. and that other experiment happening throughout. That begins with My Bridge strips and continues until the kinetoscope, but also always framing and leaving space for Mother Nature to fill in to finish the composition.
Yeah. You know, every scene that Westinghouse has or that Edison has, by and large, there is this sense that the other character is in the back of that character's head, that Edison is thinking about Westinghouse or Westinghouse is thinking about Edison, yet they don't share very many scenes together at all. I mean, how does that work for you guys as actors? Are you thinking about the other person in those scenes? And because it'd be, you know, are you thinking about each other and each other's scenes at all?
I'm always thinking about you, Michael. I love that guy. The only sour note, I guess, is that I didn't get to spend enough screen time opposite him. He's a titan of our craft, and just, you know, he raises anyone's game, and it was a pleasure to be on set and witness it. And, you know, I think for Edison, yes, it is a key drive, and it's this fear of the other. Like, what's he doing? What's he up to? And not fully understanding it. And then when it does become open warfare, how to accelerate the tactics. And I think for Edison, it became, you know, very early on, he treats him like money bags. He just thinks he's another J.P. Morgan. He's some sort of rich potential checkbook that he doesn't want to flatter. He sees him just as a capitalist and industrialist. He misses the human. And then when the human comes towards him after the offer of friendship and collaboration, to go, well, actually, you're besmirching me, and I'm going to go for you. Then it's war, and then it really escalates. And so, yeah, it was helpful, definitely, to imagine the other angle, definitely.
Yeah. Michael?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Westinghouse always had a lot on his mind. You know, what's so fascinating to me is that he was able to not be completely consumed by just running his company. I mean, when you see the shots of his place, it's gigantic. It was so big we couldn't even recreate all of it in a practical scale. We had to do like a piece of it, and then to get the rest of the distance was we did in post. Just the enormity of the operation that he's running. I just always felt kind of embarrassed. Like I could not. It's funny when you're playing people and you just think I am not capable of doing what this person did. Like, it's just not. Even if I tried really hard, yeah, I could never like be the ruler of that empire. I don't. So, but for me, there was something very charming about it. As much of a powerful, wealthy industrialist as he also seemed like a little boy. He was just. And it's almost like he had a crush on Edison, you know. I just want to meet him, you know, like geeking out, you know. I just want to meet him and talk to him about stuff, you know. And that's why I love about like that scene on the bridge early in the movie when he's just talking to Pope and he's like, doesn't he see? He's just not doing it right, you know. And I just want to tell him, you know, I don't want to beat him or, you know, any of that. And yeah, that's. So that dichotomy is really fascinating to me. Yeah.
Did you have that feeling as well that you could never be? I guess if Westinghouse is a king and sort of lording over his kingdom, Edison is this sort of self-obsessed man who just cannot get over one obsession, himself and his inventions. Did you have that feeling of you could never be like that as well? That this person is just beyond who you would ever be?
Yeah. In a nutshell, yeah. I mean,
yeah, I'm a good person. I'm not like that.
I don't know. I've got a funny-looking face. I get cast into lots of intelligence because of that. No offense to intelligent people with funny-looking faces, but I kind of fit that bill. I'm so far back in the cheap seats of amateurism when it comes to what I'm projecting as intelligence. It's a fraud I've got away with for a whole career. So long may it continue. You know. Acting.
Alfonso, the production design is beautiful. Yes. It's incredibly stunning. Where did you find a lot of these sets, and how much of them did you just build on your own? And then even the sparse ones, like we see in the trailer, just the field of bulbs. You know, going from that to then what actually feels like something that you found that is from that period of time that is so impeccably designed.
Yeah, I have to. Jan Rolfs is the production designer. Chung Win Chung shot the film. and Michael Wilkinson designed the costumes. It's important to acknowledge the people I made the movie with.
Is this the DP's first American?
No, he did Me and Earl with me. He
did?
He
Oh.
did.
Chan-wook's, Park Chan-wook's.
He's Park Chan-wook's
Yeah.
DP and the funniest guy on set. But he's it was a challenge. I love Jan Rolf because I was a fan of his work from the Peter Greenaway movies that he designed, like The Cook, the Wife, the Thief, and Her Lover, Prospero's book. So I knew we needed something bold. We were not going to reproduce the past because it was a movie about the future, not about the past. We were going to interpret it and maybe get closer to what it might have felt like being there. And so some locations we try to do as much because you want it to have a naturalistic feel. So that the CG that had to be a component didn't overtake the film and it becomes that. So hopefully it has a lived-in feel to it, an analog-y thing, so it doesn't become too the sheen of a visual effects movie. But we needed to rely on those because we couldn't, like Michael said, even if we did find a space big enough to replicate, to create Wabco out of, we didn't have the resources. And unless it's like Cleopatra or Gangs of New York, you don't have the resources to fill it with thousands of extras. So we were just surgical and judicious how we approached the spaces that we did find in the UK. But it was a world, 1880s to 93, New Jersey, New York, Pittsburgh, Chicago, that we had to create in London. But we built a few sets, and we're very lucky with some locations that we did little with. Just we extended the backgrounds to get the scope that I wanted. But it was a challenge. But I think it worked out.
You also have a way of taking very what would be minimal, minor shots and somehow turning them into feeling somewhat maximal. I'm not sure if it's the wide-angle lens, but I think even just like Michael's face in the back of a wagon, or Benedict's face in the back of a wagon, just on the sort of pillow and the way that it's shot, it suddenly feels like we are in this time period, yet it literally could just be them sitting on a chair with a pillow going like this as they, and you've somehow captured a feeling of that moment in time. And I think of the shot of Nicholas Hoult entering New York City for the first time, that beautiful shot that looks up at him, and it's just telephone wires, it's just electricity, like just wires. Like, that feels so specific and of that time, yet I imagine there's very little that you added.
Very little. In fact, that shot should have been looking down. But looking down means cobblestone streets, extras, cars, or not cars, but carriages, and so I didn't have that. So okay, so we look up, and it's much more interesting because you see the early photographs of the time with the telegram wires, and New York was fascinating to look at, especially in the winter with icicles on. But and that became a much more interesting shot, and it was literally just we were shooting the opening Niagara sequence, and Nick Hoult had finished the film, and he was rehearsing for The Favorite, and he just happened to be around, and I had given up on this shot that I desperately wanted. And he did me a solid, and in his lunch break while he was rehearsing, he got into costume, which he still had, came up, we walked, and he went right back to rehearsals. This is amazing. And it's a beautiful way to introduce this second movement of Tesla. This is post-Edison's firing, and on he goes to a new beginning, one of many. But so that was a practical, I just couldn't do this, so we just...
When you said you'd been holding on to this shot for so long, did you have basically it drawn, a storyboard, and you were like, we need this for this?
I'm still trying to get a shot for the second season of Glee that aired 8 years ago. It was the AV kids, and I was looking down. Anyway, but I will get that one day. But this is a transition that I felt I needed to show, to reintroduce Tesla, and I wanted to see and feel New York City at the time, and open up the movie so it doesn't become a lot of interiors, and so there was a lot of it's a constant battle. It's a difficult movie to pull off, and little shots like that sometimes seem unimportant to many people, but to me, I get that it was a difficult one to pull off because of the scope of it, but just by flipping the camera and looking up is something we did quite quickly.
Yeah. Okay, we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who's a question? Hey there.
My question's for Mr. Cumberbatch. Regarding your acting, you've acted in film, television, theater, and radio. How does your approach to a character or the way you perform change depending on the medium?
Yeah, it just sort of changes every time. I try to make choices that are slightly different, or at least if they're similar, spaced out enough so that I can't remember the last time I played a kind of trope or repeated a trick. But yeah, in all honesty, it's different every single time, and obviously mediums help with that. I've always thought that you can achieve something theatrical in a close-up, and you can achieve a close-up in something theatrical. I think they do talk to each other, the theatre and the screen, and the voice is a very freeing thing. It's great fun and very different technique. It's often very isolating if you're doing voice work for an animation, but radio work's great fun, especially with a live audience. So yeah, I've always tried to mix it up. I think you learn from all of them, and they feed each other.
Michael, what about you? I feel like early on in your career, you were typecast a little bit, and you found a way to break out of that completely and play all different types of roles.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it?
You're amazing, Michael. How did you do it?
Thank you, Ricky. Oh, I don't know. No, I started out doing plays mostly in Chicago, all different kinds of plays in little tiny rinky-dink theaters for free. I don't know why I ever stopped doing that. But I haven't actually. I go back and do them now and again. But yeah, I don't know. At first when you're trying to get in this business, you're just like, please, somebody hire me, give me a job, here or there, anywhere, and you do whatever. And then if you're fortunate enough to string some of that together, then you get to a certain point where we're like, well, maybe I'll be a little more discerning, and maybe I don't want to. Maybe I don't have to play that crackhead, Maybe I could pass on that. And then,
That's when I get the job of the crackhead.
Yeah, and then they call Benedict.
You get the intelligent crackhead.
Yeah,
That's what you get. One more.
This question is really for the actors, but I was wondering, what acting techniques do you guys feel more rooted in? Stanislavski or some of his contemporaries?
I can't say I actually use any of them, but I always thought Meisner's book was really interesting. And it's funny because, like, the whole repetition exercise, it's really hard to grasp. At first you're like, this just seems really idiotic. But the more you think about it, the more it really kind of makes sense. Because it really is all just about listening. But everything good in life comes from listening, I think. Yeah.
I think as Brits, I don't know if you agree with this, Benedict, but we have a really inflated sense of kind of self-awareness, and method acting is quite a challenge, because I think that we often in our schools in the UK, we're taught lots of different methods, and you can kind of cherry pick what works for you. But the majority of actors that I work with in the UK aren't very method, and they just kind of have a chat in between scenes and dive back in. So I think it really depends. I think largely the director who's guiding you on the project kind of helps you out, and it depends what you respond to individually. But yeah, I've never felt that I have to stay in character or in accent. It doesn't particularly make a difference for me, I don't think. But I find the way that you communicate with your director is really important, and it's not always the case that you have a director who is very good with actors and knows how to get a very specific emotional reaction from you. Sometimes they're more focused on the technical side or the camera or something, but we were really lucky with Alfonso that he can do all of those things really brilliantly, and we kind of struck gold with that.
I mean, my technique is just to lean. I just lean on things all the time. I lean on walls and desks and lean on pillows as much. I love leaning on pillows. That's my favorite technique.
What happened to the director?
I mean, no, seriously, I lean on a good script. I lean on a good director. I lean on my colleagues. I lean on collaboration. You get to the privileged position where you're overworked. It's really nice to use a costume fitting to go, oh, that's what that feels like. That's what that looks like. I'll play a bit with that. On another moment, it may be a detail in your research. You went, well, I definitely want to hardwire into that. Another moment, it may be an accent you need to hold on to because you're just not good at holding on to accents in my case, so I'll hold on to that. And assimilation is great, and immersion is great, and I think it's fine as long as you're not fucking up other people's workspace by being selfish in your demands and taking all the oxygen out of the room because it's about you and your way and nobody else's. I find that a little bit abhorrent. But at the same time, it's good to feed off that as well, and sometimes it can feed into an antagonism. Not always healthy, but you know. Meisner's really interesting. Laban and Stanislavski, obviously, you know, examining a character is just the key thing. And, you know, like Michael, it's an excuse for further learning. I love that privilege that we have as actors, that every job is an excuse to learn. So why not let that also be about your technique and how you work, as well as the subject matter and the era and the character, if there's stuff to grasp and grapple with there. Enjoy throwing yourself into a different sandpit with different rules, you know. If you're lucky enough to work with a guy like this, you, again, lean on him.
I'm curious, when you're doing a motion capture type of performance, what kind of techniques do you lean on there, or do you find it's the same sort of it's really the same thing, just a different medium?
Yeah, completely. I mean, the first thing I ever did with motion capture was Smaug, and it was like being a kid again. It was utterly freeing. There were no marks, no makeup checks, no one fiddling with my hair or adjusting a collar that was just so before they adjusted it. Nothing, you know, there in your personal space, and an impossible task to imagine yourself being however many 100-year-old fire-breathing massive serpent the size of Big Ben. It's a tricky one, but it's also what kids do in their bedroom. It's play, it's playful, and it's freeing. You just have to lose your inhibitions in a leotard in front of loads of technicians who've seen it all before. So once you get over that hump, it's fun.
I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's a different tool to work with actors on a TV set versus working on a movie. Oftentimes in TV sets, if you're not doing the pilot or early on, the actors have a very clear idea as to how their characters would handle the scene. How did you handle going from starting in TV and moving into directing movies and directing actors in movies?
The later TV work always involved shooting pilots, and I love that process of building a character with an actor. I adore actors. I absolutely adore them. They're an extension of my imagination, and I love being with them and challenging the script. And I always approach the material. What would an actor ask me? You know, where did I come from? What am I doing here? Where am I going? And I think of every possible question an actor could ask me to be, because I love that interaction and that challenge. And so I treat any actor I work with, whether it's in television or in films, with the same amount of respect. And even if in my earlier years, when I was doing middle episodes of a series, if I felt something, if my body was telling me something, I was never afraid to be vocal about it. And oftentimes in television, actors have told me they want to be directed, and sometimes directors just don't direct it. They assume that they don't want to have that conversation. Yeah. But I've been lucky to work with just incredible actors in my years doing television. And I mean, I just worked with Al Pacino on a pilot, which was one of the most amazing experiences, in addition to this one, because everyone, they all share this common quality, which is just there's a humility and a generosity and an openness and in surrendering to the character, and a trust that then becomes a very kind of sacred relationship on set. But so that's a very long answer to saying I treat everyone with respect, but if I feel something, I always try to communicate it in the best way I can.
I have to let you guys go. The film is called The Current War. The director's cut. It's in theaters. Is it start this
Friday?
This Friday. It is in theaters. Go see it. It's a beautiful film. Needs to be seen on the big screen. And give them a huge round of applause for being here.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.